another big fight announcement for the bantamweight division. Petr Yan is going to be fighting Merab Dvalishvili. That's the number 2 versus the number 3 contenders. And I would have to think that the winner still will not get a title shot. Now, Merab, regardless if he wins, is not going to fight Aljamain Sterling ever. So he's just a placeholder at the top of the division until Sterling loses, or if Sterling moves up to featherweight one day. But I believe Petr Yan would need one more win to get his next title shot because he is on a 2-loss streak, and Chito is fighting Corey Sandhagen, Sean O'Malley is waiting in the wings, and Henry Cejudo should be the guy up next to fight Sterling. So there's quite a bit of a line right now that are ahead of Yan. Things go well for him. If Corey beats Chito, Petr beats Merab, then maybe you do a rematch between Corey and Petr, because essentially the top guys in the division that would need to fight for the belt next are O'Malley, Yan, and Sandhagen. And Yan fought both those guys already. And it's funny because if Petr Yan loses to Merab, which is actually a very likely thing to happen, he would be on a 3-loss streak, 1-4 in his last 5 fights, and people will still regard him as the best fighter in the whole division. It can honestly be true. If Merab just holds Petr up against the fence and wins a decision through that, it is 5 rounds, so it's going to be much harder for Merab to do it and not get punished at all in the fight. Yan still could be looked at as the best fighter in the division on a 3-loss streak, as weird as that is. And even Henry Cejudo has already given his take on this fight, and he says that Merab is going to make this fight look easy. He said this months ago though, before the fight was announced. I can see where he's coming from in the notion that Petr Yan just doesn't have good takedown defense, and Merab trains with Aljamain, so he's going to have that kind of information, as well as the experience through Aljamain Sterling. Also, him being the second best wrestler in the division behind Henry Cejudo could logically mean that Petr Yan is not going to be ready for that kind of wrestling, but there is a big misconception about Petr Yan's takedown defense. I don't know what's happened, but people think that Petr Yan can't wrestle. All of a sudden, he has bad takedown defense, when this is just not true. The worst thing about Petr Yan is not his takedown defense, it's him giving up his back when he got taken to the ground. That's the bigger thing. And he did that to Aljamain, who's the best back taker ever in the bantamweight division. Nobody is better at getting in your back like Aljamain Sterling. Merab doesn't even compare. And also, Aljamain usually gets his takedowns in the center of the cage, not against the fence where your back is up against it, right? It's much harder to get someone's back when their back's against the cage. That's how Merab gets the majority of his takedowns. People are only looking at the 2 takedowns that Sterling got on Petr Yan in their second fight. But I thought that was more credit to Aljamain Sterling rather than knocking Petr Yan for his takedown defense, because Petr Yan defended 20 takedowns in that fight. People don't remember that. He got taken down 2 times out of 22 takedowns. Against Aljamain Sterling in the first fight, he was only taken down once out of 17. Jose Aldo shot a takedown, was defended. Uriah Faber shot 3 takedowns, were defended, and he's a pretty good wrestler. Jimmy Rivera shot 3 takedowns, all defended. Douglas Silva de Andrade shot once, was defended as well. This concept that Petr Yan has weak wrestling is clearly not true, statistically speaking. The guy's a 90% takedown defensive rate. And yes, he's never fought a wrestler like Merab, so I do expect him to get taken down probably more often, but I also do expect him to defend many takedowns as well. And with the mere fact that he will defend takedowns against Merab, will give him plenty of opportunities to exploit those holes. So if we really look at the way that Sterling took Yan to the ground, they were much better shots than people give him credit for, and both of them were extended from the single leg takedown. Merab will shoot single legs as well, but he has a different kind of style to Aljamain Sterling. Sterling has an okay shot, but he has a much better drive. When he creates contact and grabs your leg, he can bulldoze you to the ground. He's a fairly big guy for the bantamweight division, definitely bigger than Yan is and Merab, and when it gets to the ground, the bigger thing we have to look at is his control. Sterling got Yan's back better than Merab is going to be able to. Right, for the first takedown, Aljamain shot the single, it got defended, and then he kinda turned it almost into like a knee tap, or he just pushed Petr Yan from the shoulder to break his balance, and then he just ran him over. It wasn't the most technical takedown, it was a lot of muscle, a lot of strength, and understanding of angles. Yan could not keep his balance and then immediately got his back taken. If it wasn't Aljamain Sterling here, I guarantee Yan would have gotten up against 90% of other grapplers. But because it was Sterling that quickly rotated to his back, it's a different story. And then for the second takedown, Yan actually caused it to himself. He way overextended with his punch, punched over his own knees, which is actually something he does very often. It's one of the biggest weaknesses that he has to his striking. Yan threw in the whizzer as Sterling switched into the single leg. And then look how Sterling is just trying to muscle him over. He's trying to run him to the ground again. But the cage was behind Yan, so it allowed him to stand up from the initial takedown, and that's what Sterling had to mix it up. You could just see the sheer strength that Sterling has. Goes chest to hip with Petr, grabs that double leg and just sweeps him off of his feet. And Yan made the big mistake of giving up his back, and he did this twice. You never want to do that against Aljamain Sterling. You could probably get away with it against Merab, potentially, but you still don't want to do that there as well. And remember, Merab is training with Aljamain. He's going to know that this is what Yan does if he gets taken to the ground. So you could even imagine the game plan for Merab is to look for the back when he takes down Yan. And what did you notice when Merab fought Aldo? He was only shooting when he got Aldo up against the fence. He used his jab to pressure, his right straight to create some threats, some leg kicks here and there, and just walked Aldo down slowly. This is why pressure in this fight is so important, because Merab's takedowns are going to be a lot easier to defend if Yan is at least keeping it to the center, and especially if he's pressuring Merab backwards, which fighters have done before. But here's one important thing about Merab. This is his first 5-round fight. I think he is definitely more than conditioned enough to go 5 rounds and wrestle with Yan. But conditioning is not the only factor. You do need to know how to pace yourself, especially against Yan, who gets better as the fight goes on. The pacing is going to be a lot more important for Merab. Maybe he starts out even faster, or just fast enough to take those early rounds from Yan until Yan starts to download the data and capitalize on the holes that he sees, because he definitely will find them. Yan is very hard to beat in the 4th and 5th rounds. As many times as Merab shoots, his style is going to look a lot more one-dimensional to Petr Yan. For the first 2 rounds, Yan may have a bit of an issue with defending the takedowns and knowing the correct technique at the correct moments. He might get held up against the fence, he might get taken to the ground and just controlled. But in the later rounds, I can expect him to start defending them and start landing good counter shots, intercepting punches and knees and stuff like that. But when you really think about the fight, who would win this by a decision, you definitely see a good path for Merab to win this. But if anybody's going to get finished, it's 100% Petr Yan finishing Merab, who got hurt badly by an older Marlon Moraes. Because Merab's striking could be stiff, his head is there to be hit, his striking defense is actually him shooting takedowns. That's how he moves his head. And if that's like the only thing that Yan is going to see, I throw punches, he's going to shoot takedowns on me, or he's just going to move away from me, that could be pretty easy for Yan to get used to. He can start pumping out jabs to force a shot and then hit him with an uppercut, or back his hips away at an angle, get Merab to shoot that takedown past Yan, and now Yan has Merab up against the fence. And also, that's another big thing. Yan is going to want to keep some pressure on Merab. You always want to do this against heavy wrestlers. It makes the takedown a lot more obvious, and Yan could really work off of his jab. I think his intercepting punches and just being as precise as possible is where he can win this fight. It's going to take a couple rounds for him to find those shots, because we all know how Merab is going to fight. He faces everybody almost the exact same way. He strikes with you a little bit to get you thinking about his punches, throw some jabs out there, some quick right hands, and then he starts shooting immediately. Look at the activity of Merab's takedowns. He has shot 51 takedowns in his last 4 fights. That's how often he shoots. He shot 16 times on Jose Aldo, got none of them, he just held Aldo up against the fence. We'll never forgive him for that. He shot 4 takedowns on Marlon Moraes, which was not even a 2-round fight, and he got all 4 takedowns. Again, this wasn't older Moraes. He shot 11 takedowns against Cody Stamann and got 5 of them. Cody Stamann is actually a decent wrestler. And then he shot 20 takedowns against John Dodson and only got 2. And we know John Dodson has incredible takedown defense, most of it off of his athleticism and speed. And ultimately, this is going to really ride on Petr Yan's chances of finding those big openings later in the rounds after he downloads the data of what he has to do. So I think it's a great fight. I think it's a tough fight for both guys. This is the biggest wrestler Petr Yan has ever fought, and this is potentially the best striker that Merab has fought. But the bigger thing is, Petr Yan is so much better in 5-round fights, and he's really going to let loose in those later rounds. That's where Merab is definitely going to have to be cautious.